Welcome back to the My Latin Life podcast. Since 2014, My Latin Life has been your trusted guide to traveling and living in Latin America. Today, I have a repeat guest back for his second appearance, GlobalGaz, aka Ric Gazarian. How's it going, man?
Vance, great to be back. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. And for the people who missed the first episode or haven't heard of you before, tell us a little bit about GlobalGaz and counting countries and all the great things you do.
Yeah, so GlobalGaz is a travel content creator who happens to be Chasing 193. Chasing 193 is the mission to visit all 193 UN member states. I have a little blog, GlobalGaz. I also have my own podcast, which we'll be talking to you on that after this. Where I've interviewed people who are going to every single country in the world, and also the organizer of the Extraordinary Travel Festival, which is the world's largest gathering of the most traveled people.
And I'm super fascinated about this whole idea of the world's most traveled people, this idea of visiting every country in the world. I'm sure most people, if money was no object and this kind of thing, and we didn't have as many false constraints as we create for ourselves in life, most people would like to go to every country in the world, right?
Like everything, I think, in the world of travel, I'll say two things. One, you got to do what makes you happy. So if it's going to Disney World 200 times, God bless you, go to Disney World. If it's, spending 6 months on the Albanian coast, do that. And if it's Chasing 193, do that. So I think that's lesson one. Don't follow someone else's definition of what counts as travel. Number two, I'm going to say in the world of Chasing 193, the individuals trying to go to every one country in the world, there is 1,000 different ways to bake that cake. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So there are guys who are only 5-star hotels and they're on a private jet here and there. There are other guys who are kind of doing it on 20, 30, 40 bucks a day. And they're grinding it out. They're eating local food in Guinea-Bissau at $3 for lunch. And they're taking a 13-hour minivan ride that fits 12 people, but there's 37 people and that's $6. So now there's a couple caveats in there. The reality is if you're flying around to the Pacific nations, that's going to be expensive no matter how you cut it. But it's not the only domain of the super rich and the super wealthy is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, definitely makes sense. I definitely want to talk more about in this episode about you've interviewed most of the most traveled people in the world. And just based on where we are, you've basically that kind of means you've spoken to most of the most traveled people in world history, technically, which is kind of crazy to think about. How many countries are you at personally right now?
Yeah, I am finally getting closer. So, and again, there's a whole secondary debate of how many countries there are in the world. I'm sort of a simpleton purist. To me, the denominator is 193. That's the UN members recognized by the UN as sovereign countries. Yeah. I am at 181. Do the math.
You're higher than I thought. I thought you were like 140 or something.
Well, maybe the last time we spoke, but I've made a little bit of progress, so I'm down to 12.
Wow. What are the 12 that are left?
So one in Oceania, which is Nauru. And I tried to go 3 times in 2024. I was unsuccessful. I have one country left in Asia, which I don't want to say because I've been rejected for the visa 5 times since 2017.
Wow.
I've got 3 in Europe and 7 in the Caribbean.
Okay. So the Caribbean is like the easy one that you're kind of missing. Okay. I almost want to play the guessing game now. So what would you be missing in Asia that actually requires a visa for U.S. citizens? Because you only have a U.S. passport, right?
Correct. I am a boring guy with only one passport. Yeah.
Okay, so U.S. citizen. Is it Burma, Myanmar?
Well, it's not because I'm a U.S. citizen, and this country is a highly authoritative, dictatorship,
Tibet?
which is all,
Tibet's not a.
which is also very, very wealthy, and they don't need tourism. So
Oh,
my understanding
what's it
is
called?
everybody who applies, they Google you,
Uh huh.
and basically I have been thrown into the journalist bucket, and I'm putting quotes around
Wow.
journalists. And this country simply doesn't want bad press. And they're like, okay, we don't need the money. And this guy has a lot of, post or podcast or whatnot. We're just going to throw him off to the side. We don't need him. So I've been trying desperately, and now I'm at the point I don't want to mention the country because it's, for all I know,
They're listening
they'll
in.
Google it and they'll see this,
Okay.
and so I
Okay.
just want to tell them I love them, and I would never write or say anything bad about the.
Tell me this. I'm going to get you in trouble on purpose. If someone illegally enters a country and they don't have a stamp, does it still count from the perspective of the counting country's community?
Yeah, yeah. And this is what I always say: there is no universal governing body ruling over the world of chasing 193, right?
Hmm.
So at the end of the day, everybody can make their own rules on what counts as visiting a country. Um, in fact, there's another guy who just finished 193 probably a couple years ago, and for his visit to this country, he went to the uh, adjacent country, took out Google Map, walked 5 meters across the border, did a dance, and said, "Oh, I just went to country X." I don't want to do that. Uh, One, because to me it doesn't really count, and two, I really want to go to this country. There are a number of travel clubs in the 193 community.
Hmm.
Traveler Century Club,
Hmm.
Most Traveled People, and another one called Nomad Mania.
Hmm.
Each one of these groups has their own definition of rules of what counts as visiting a country. But
Hmm.
again, you only join and abide by their rules in a voluntary setting. No one is forced to be part of any of those three communities. So again, at the end of the day, you define your own rules that you want to live by.
Okay, cool. What, in your personal opinion, do you consider the 5 minute dance as counting?
Yeah, so I do have a rule. My one rule really is no airport transfer. So,
Uh-huh.
you mentioned I've interviewed a lot of well traveled people. And one thing I noted, 5, 7 years ago is the last country. And there's two different types of last countries, man. There is the holdback and whatever I happen to end with. So, whatever I happen to end with is typically a country with a tough visa or difficult to get to, like Eritrea or Democratic Republic of Congo or North
Right.
Korea. And it's like I would interview somebody and I'm like, oh, tell me about your last country. That's such an accomplishment. How did you celebrate? Oh, I got in at 2 in the morning. My taxi driver ripped me off. The hotel didn't have electricity, and I had to walk up 13 flights of stairs, and I sat by myself. Or you hold one back, again,
Yeah.
air quotes, a
Yeah.
good country. So I have been saving Ireland for like 8 years. Ireland will be my last country
Hmm.
because what a great place to end in for your last country.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I've technically been there because I have flown through the airport, but I
That
don't
doesn't
count that.
count. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Again, my personal rule.
Okay. Yeah. Pint of Guinness to end off the mission. That makes sense.
Exactly. And I'm hoping some friends might join.
Yeah.
We both share some Boston roots.
Uh
I
huh.
went to Boston College, which is this great Irish Catholic school.
Yeah.
So, in honor of my alma mater, and hopefully some friends of mine from Boston will join. It's pretty easy to get to Ireland from Boston compared to
Yeah.
Republic of Congo.
Yeah. No, it makes sense. I would. Yeah. How do you not go to Ireland? Like, how do you leave that for years and years? I mean, I would. just because it's like a country you actually want to go to. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like
Yeah.
why? It's like if you probably want to go to Ireland and you're kind of like restricting yourself from going type of thing. Um, but no, I get it. I get it. I think that's the way to do it though, is to leave the best country for something that, um, well, one, something that you can invite people to celebrate with you at, you know what I mean? Some friends in the family at the finish line kind of thing.
And also that has now become kind of a thing. So there's a
Yeah.
well-known Croatian blogger. He just finished his last country. It was Sri Lanka.
Uh huh.
And I wasn't there at this event, but it turned into an event. It was like 100 people over a long weekend of like parties and dinners and celebrations. Um, so people are kind of making it a thing. Another one of my friends just finished over Christmas, New Year's Eve in Jamaica. I think she went down with like 15
I
friends.
would do
So
Jamaica,
yeah,
right? Like shot of rum.
a
I,
little
I would do
reggae.
Jamaica. I would do Jamaica for sure. That'd be a good one. Okay. One thing I thought would be interesting to talk about would be like costs, honestly. How do people think about money? Do you find that most people you interview, this is sort of their life's mission, and so they're down to just like spend all their money on making this happen?
That's another real difficult question because the 193 community is not a monolith. I just mentioned I organized this event, the Extraordinary Travel Festival, quote unquote, the world's most traveled people. The
Hmm.
youngest person there was 21, the
Hmm.
oldest, 80 years old. 6 different continents, about 60% men, 40% women. It's a diverse group. And everybody really is doing it a different way. And, yeah. So, there's some people are like, I'm going to take a sabbatical from work or quit work and I'm going to focus on doing as many countries for 2 years and then go back to reality. Then there's someone who, lives in Sweden and is able to get 8 weeks paid vacation a year. And they
Yeah,
use every single day of vacation. And it's like, okay, for every vacation, I'm going to block off 2 weeks and visit 4 countries, and then they just chip away methodically year after year after year. Um, and
I like
as I
that.
as I kind of noted before, some people money is no object. Most of the people are kind of in the middle, and then there's some guys who are really on much more of a severe budget and watching their money. And even another category, I guess, would be people creating content
Hmm.
and able to derive income and chase 193 at the same time.
There's this Paraguayan content creator that I follow. He's from Paraguay, and he's on a super budget. I'm not sure if you've come across him.
I think I met him.
So
What's his name? Do you
you
remember?
have to tell me. It's not coming to mind right now.
Well, I met a Paraguayan content creator in the Pacific island of Tuvalu.
Okay. Does he have the tattoo of the like countries on his back and stuff? This episode of the My Latin Life podcast is brought to you in part by Job Stacking. If you're a remote or hybrid worker looking to maximize your earning potential, then Rolf Haltza, author of Job Stacking, guarantees you'll be able to double your income by implementing his paycheck multiplication layering method. This is the exact system Rolf has used to take his own income and those of many others beyond $20K a month. With this method, Rolf contractually guarantees that you'll be able to double your income in 45 days. So, if you're interested in unleashing your earning potential and doubling your income, then click the link in the description and book a call with Rolf right now.
He might have. I can't remember, but I don't think there's that many Paraguayans chasing
I
193.
think he's the only one chasing 193. what is his name? But so he's probably at like 150 right now, and he's doing it on like a super budget. And I'd be watching his Instagram stories, and he'd be like working illegally in Barcelona, painting houses and doing construction work for a month, and then using that money and going to Africa and going to Angola and Equatorial Guinea and all this type of stuff, and being on like super budget, taking the buses. So that's like a super budget way to do it. And there's so many inconveniences and pitfalls that can come, like, because all these visas cost money, right? You got to pay the $150 visa fee and like this and that. And there's all these like random points where you need money that could potentially screw up someone on a tight budget.
100%. And there's all these other additional X factors. You get sick, you get malaria, and you're laid up for 2 weeks. You get robbed, and you lose your cell phone.
Mm-hmm.
Or you take a bus somewhere, and after 7 hours, you realize you took the wrong bus. You're in the wrong town, and that ends up costing you $100. So there are definite pitfalls. There's definite real big challenges financially for many people to
Mm-hmm.
pulling this off. Yeah, and I mean, it's definitely easier. The idea of visiting all 193, I mean, at some levels, probably never been easier than it is today versus
Mm-hmm.
10 or 20 years ago. But I mean, I'm speaking from personal experience, and I'm a fortunate individual. It's been a mission of mine since '09. I mean, I'm not done,
Yeah.
and I'm not sure when I'm going to finish with the visa challenge of that last country in Asia. Um, so yeah, it's not a. I don't consider it a simple undertaking. It's can be challenging, and for some individuals, the quotient of difficulty is even of a greater magnitude because maybe they have a shit passport. Maybe they have
Yeah.
financial constraints. Maybe they're working.
Like the
Maybe they
Paraguayan
get
guy.
linkage.
Imagine. I wonder. I would. He's probably getting denied more visas than you are.
Yeah.
So there's two guys. There's Fabio Patino and there's Gerardo Franco.
I think it might be Geraldo.
Gerardo. Here, I'll show you a photo. Um, and he takes like a picture with the flag, like every country he goes to.
Yes. Yeah.
This dude.
Yeah. If you if you go back in his feed and you look for Tuvalu, I'm
Uh
sure
huh.
there's of him holding the flag, and I'm pretty sure I
You're
took a
in the
bunch
photo
of
or
them.
something? Oh
Yeah,
yeah.
I took the photo for him, and that like in case in point, I can't remember exactly. His phone broke, so that is a financial challenge for somebody, and he's one. I mean, it makes travel so much more difficult without the connectivity of a phone. And then the guy's dealing with the cost of buying a new phone in the Pacific. So yeah, so I mean, as a side note, Vance, Tuvalu is, I think it's either the smallest or second smallest country in the world in terms of population. 11,000 people live in this country. It's one of the most cut off or remote countries in the world. Only one other country is connected to it from a flight perspective. So the only country that flies to Tuvalu is
Mhm.
Fiji. So
Okay.
there's 3 flights a week to the outside world. That's it. There's no other connections. So when you fly from Fiji to Tuvalu, there's only 3 types of people on that plane. There's local Tuvaluans and Fijians going back and forth between the islands. There's a bunch of NGO UN type people. And the third category is people like me and my Paraguayan friend. So by the time we all got into the airport, there's like 6 of us. So that was kind of my
Some good
posse.
networking.
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, we're having lunches, we're renting motorbikes together, we're going on boat rides, and you found your little crew, your tribe, as you got off the airplane, and you kind of self-sorted into these 3 different groups, and he was part of that community in Tuvalu. Yeah.
That's so cool. I'm looking at his feed now. People can look it up. It's Gerard dot con mochila is his Instagram. So he's at 184 now. So he just
Oh,
overpassed you.
oh man, good for him. Awesome.
Yeah, 184 for him was Kiribati.
Ah,
I f-
Kiribati.
Kirib. Oh, he's saying it in Spanish.
Kiribati is how it's spelled, but for some reason it's pronounced Kiribati. A little trivia for you.
Interesting. It looks like he just went to Nauru too. You
Yeah,
should have gone with him.
I should have. I should have.
Interesting. And so how much are these flights costing for the Pacific Islands specifically? Like how much is the Fiji to Tuvalu round trip?
Yeah, so that one I do remember. I want to say round trip. It was like $900. So yeah, I mean, and there's no there's there's no two ways around it because again, only one airline from one country. So that would epitomize the financial challenges within the quest of 193 that there really isn't a workaround to do that one. So that one sucks.
Interesting. So how many countries are in the Pacific and how much do you think someone would have to budget to just knock out the whole Pacific?
Um, on, sadly, I don't have that memorized. Um, you, uh, I'm going to give a shout out to a company called Young Pioneer Tours. Uh, we have a little ecosystem. So there's a handful of companies which specialize in bringing us to off the beaten path countries like Libya or Syria or Yemen. YPT became well known for bringing people to DPRK, North Korea, but they have really expanded the number of countries that they
Yeah,
go
they
to.
do trips in Latin America.
Yeah, yeah. So
Yeah.
they do like dark tourism and off the beaten path. Um, and I'm just going to give this kind of as an example. Like they have a Pacific Island tour. I don't even know if it goes to all of them, but like that tours, I think is like $14,000. I want to say so. That includes hotels and stuff like that, not just flights. But that gives you an idea of how things can add up price wise.
Cool. Um, give us like a bit of. I would love to hear just like some stories because you must have endless stories from 180 plus countries. Maybe since we're talking about the Pacific region, you could tell us some there, or I want to get some of the ones that you haven't told before. Um,
Yeah, so I'll stick with Tuvalu.
yeah,
There's a famous, there's a well-known 193er whose name is Lee Abamonte. I think he was the first. He
sure.
was the youngest American to visit all 193 at one point,
Hmm.
and he's got a pretty big social media presence. Good guy. I've met him a couple of times, and he was just posting on IG. He created his top 20 boringest countries of the world. Number one for him was Tuvalu, and I'm like Lee. I'm like I actually kind of enjoyed it there. Um, so Tuvalu again, it's like 10 or 11,000 people. I mean, there's just nothing there. It's this skinny little atoll with no industry, nothing going on there. The thing to do in the 193 community where it's kind of well known or famous is the airport, and more specifically, the runway. I don't, my guess is it might be the only international airport in the world without security. Starting an hour or two before sunset, the entire country seems to migrate to the non fenced, non perimetered runway. It's completely open. It's the biggest open public space on the island. So, starting at sunset, people are playing football, they're playing volleyball, they're having picnics, they're taking naps. And this is where everybody congregates on the entire country is this runway. So that's a big part of visiting Tuvalu is taking in the people watching, hanging out, talking to locals, having fun. I rented a motorbike. So in darkness at like 5 a.m., I got my motorbike on one end of the runway. And as the sun was coming up, I did 3 back and forth down the runway, just zipping down on the motorbike. I'm like, this is some sort of bucket list thing to do where I'm able to just cruise down this runway. And the other little kind of funny anecdote is at 6 a.m., I passed 2 passed out guys. So just guys passed out on the runway, surrounded by empty beer cans. So it's also a place to party. So that was kind of a memorable experience going to this country, just chilling and hanging out in this runway, which no security, no fence, no nothing.
That's cool. And I guess you have to wait a couple days until the next flight, right?
Exactly. It's either 2 or 3 flights a week. So, I mean, do the math. That runway is 99% completely open. I mean, there's nothing going on there.
So I guess you've done every country in Latin America, right? You've done Guyana and Suriname, Venezuela. This episode of the My Latin Life podcast is brought to you in part by Crema Social. Crema Social is like TikTok for international dating. It's an app you can download right now on your phone, and 3 out of 4 people on Crema are single women. The app was founded in Colombia, so unsurprisingly, there are a lot of Latinas on the app, by the way. So how does it work? Crema Social is a social meal experience where you invite a hot girl for a lunch date via video call and food delivery. New concept, so you'll have to try it out for yourself, but this is probably the best way to meet Latinas before you visit the country. So if you're in Latin America or planning to visit Latin America, download Crema Social now and start getting dates right away. There will be a link in the description to download, or just search Crema Social on your favorite app store. Have fun, guys.
Yeah. Yep. So I finished South America summer of 2023. I did the 3 Guyanas. One of them is technically not a UN country, French Guiana, but yeah, so I finished off those 3 last summer. So that was a pretty cool.
Tell us a little bit about that trip. I know in our Telegram groups, people often talk about it, try to get some intel, see if it's worth doing, uh, that kind of thing. What was your experience like in Suriname and in Guyana?
So I mean, I would consider all 3 of them, and I mean, you're the South American expert, but I mean, talk about a fish out of water. We got 3 eccentric, quirky countries in South America. They they just don't fit on that continent, but there they are. Um, French Guiana again is not a country; it's simply a territory or part of France.
Right,
I
right.
think you just posted this on Twitter the other day. I mean,
Hmm.
trivia: the largest national park in the EU is in South America. So we got that. So 2 highlights of French Guiana. One is Devil's Island, which is a penal colony off of French Guiana. So you can take a tour and visit there. I think that was started like in the late 1800s, famous for imprisoning Alfred Dreyfus, who was wrongly imprisoned there like 100 something years ago. The other very cool thing for me is I forget the name, but basically the European Space Base is in Guyana, so you can do a tour of that space base.
Yep.
Which I mean, I'm not very knowledgeable or an expert, but I definitely appreciate having this access and experience to the space base like that. Then I crossed by land. So I took some sort of shared taxi to the border, took a little water taxi for a couple of euro, stamped into Suriname. Suriname, again, it's just one of these countries that doesn't fit in South America. It was formerly a Dutch colony. Now it's an independent country. The capital, it's a little, it's not the most secure, safe place, like from a street crime perspective. The capital would be this amazing, like walking tour city. So many colonial buildings from the good old days. I mean, it just would be if someone dropped in, X million dollars of renovating the place and providing some security, it would be like a very touristy, beautiful place to visit. So some good, interesting history there. Then I had a very long day. It was like a 14-hour day. I got picked up at like 4 a.m. in Suriname at my hotel and got to Georgetown, the capital of Guyana, at like 3 p.m. Later that day. So that was exhausting. The big kind of check the box thing to do in Guyana is to take a scenic flight and to Kator Falls, which is just totally in the jungle in the bush. I forget what it holds. It's like the biggest, longest single drop waterfall in the world. It's not one of those claim to fames. Georgetown is a little rough around the edges, also from a crime perspective. I didn't personally have any issues. But yeah, I mean, three interesting, quirky, unique countries.
And you wrote blog articles about all these?
I have I've been blogging less and less. I've just been running out of time, so I don't think I have any blogs on any of those three countries. I mean, I posted some photos on Instagram, etc.
Because you at least need some photos for the proof, right?
Yeah, yeah. And to take a step back, I mentioned these travel clubs: Traveler Century Club, Most Traveled People, Nomad Mania. I
Mhm.
am part of all three. Two of them will validate and authenticate your travel. So once I hit 193, Most Traveled People and Nomad Mania will reach out to me to check, and I have to prove I've been to 193. They used a bunch of different methodologies, obviously photos, passport stamps, credit card statements, et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, you do want to have some proof.
And do you check before you visit a country if because especially for the Nomad Mania and the ones where there's like 1,300 different particular regions. So maybe in a country like Guyana, because it's actually pretty big, there's like multiple Nomad Mania regions, and then do you make a conscious effort to visit all the regions?
Yep. So what you're getting, you're making an astute comment. I'm chasing 193, 193 UN members. Some people in the community say, well, that's not a very effective measuring stick or benchmark to see if you're a well traveled guy. Okay, you go to Russia, which has, I think it's 13 different time zones, and
Hmm.
I can fly in, have lunch in Moscow, and fly out the same day. I mean, obviously, I've been to Russia, right? I mean, I had lunch there.
Hmm.
But have I seen Russia? And arguably not. So, what Nomad Mania did is they will track your travels to 193, but they divided the world into 1,301 regions. So, Russia, I'm making this number up, but they have 67 regions because that's what
Yeah,
they're using
yeah.
some
There's lots of
mechanism
different
to,
cultures and stuff. Yeah.
yeah, so it's autonomous states and regions and islands. And they said, okay, to truly see Russia, one, and to consider yourself really well traveled, you have to go to 67 different places in Russia. So, long answer, I am not quote unquote chasing Nomad Mania 1301, but I am aware of it. And at times, I will make an extra effort saying, like, oh, there's another region I can get to in a
Uh-huh.
3-hour drive and there's something interesting there,
Uh-huh.
you know what? I'm going to make that extra effort to do that. And whether it's Nomad Mania or MTP, the concept of dividing the world into these smaller places is an effective mechanism and catalyst to encourage you to see more of that country. And you
Yeah.
benefit from that.
Yeah, yeah, I think everyone benefits. It makes sense because country lines are obviously a little bit like arbitrary, or they don't reflect maybe like the richness of Earth in some ways. I remember I was listening to one of your podcasts with the Spanish guy that's one of the most traveled people in the world. What's his name? Jorge or something?
Jorge, no, no, shoot. The Spanish guy,
Who lives in Russia now,
he
I
lives
believe.
in Russia. This guy is so hardcore.
And
It,
I think it was your interview with him, and you were like, "Yeah, man, you're pretty close to like all whatever 1,300 zones. You're just missing a couple in like northern Nigeria." And he's like, "Yeah, dude, I'm not doing that." Like, yeah, he's like, "I have no desire to go back."
yeah. Yeah. I mean, so, yeah, yeah, yeah. He said he could. I mean, he said, "I am retired." Like he's living in Siberia, and he's like, "I'm done." He's like, I've put in my 40 or 50 years of seeing the world so intensely, more than 99.99999% of humanity. He's like, I'm done. I'm retired. That's it. So, yeah. I mean, one other, I mean, unfortunately, I can't remember all these interviews, but I mean, this guy is hardcore. I forget the exact number. He was trying to walk home from Pakistan to Spain because he was out of money and walked through Afghanistan during the war and was imprisoned. Like he was in an Afghan prison for 1 year or 2 year until the Spanish government intervened and flew him home back to Spain. So,
Mhm.
as I said, I mean, there are so many different characters and types of people in the 193 community. Uh, he I mean, he's just like the salt of the earth, hardcore. Like, he traveled so slow. He lived everywhere. He worked all around the world and just did it all. And I mean, like I also said, you got to do what makes you happy. And I'm like, I'm never going to do that. Like, I'm not walking through Sudan to save $50. Like, that's just not me. I'm like, it wouldn't be fun for me. I wouldn't like it. But that guy, I mean, God bless him. He's just experienced so much. And yeah, I'm just the tip of the iceberg compared to him.
I did an interview with Thor Peterson. You might have even been the one that introduced me to him. And so I did an interview with Thor, who famously was, I believe, the first person to visit every country in the world without flying, right? And
To be very specific, Thor
mhm.
Peterson is the first guy to go to every country in the world without an airplane in an unbroken journey without returning home until he finished the journey.
I love how this community gets specific. And the question or kind of theme that I was getting to is that once people finish this mission, they sometimes feel that they have all these reflections on like, was it worth it? Do my colleagues and family and friends back home value what I did? And he was even kind of expressing to me as he's like, yeah, dude, no, almost like people basically just didn't care. You know what I mean? And so it really has to be like an internal journey in that sense, because people are just so absorbed in their own lives, type of thing. Um, it's funny. Have there been cases where people like fall into depression after finishing, or things like that?
Yeah. And just to take one quick step back to give this guy credit, it's George Sanchez, who is just the ultra hardcore Spanish traveler. For Thor Peterson, I hope you would agree with this a little bit. I am sort of a Thor whisperer. I interviewed him like 10 times or something for my
Oh wow.
podcast. And I was kind of the last several years, I was documenting his journey by interviewing him every 6 months.
Yeah.
And just like we're giving George Sanchez this like incredible credit for like being such an outlier in terms of seeing the world, unless you really think about it or really read about it, you can't understand the gravity of what Thor did and accomplished and sacrificed. It
Mm-hmm.
is really insane what he did. He left Denmark, his home, in 2013 and didn't return home until almost 10 years later in 2023. So think about that. You don't see your friends, your family, weddings, funerals, birthday parties, birth of your nephew or niece. It's an incredible sacrifice. Now,
Mm-hmm.
all of this was self-induced, right? I mean, no one forced him to do this, but
Mm-hmm.
his grit. I mean, we have a little thing. We said, redefining grit since 2013. 99.999% of humanity would have quit well before ever accomplishing this goal. And I have such incredible respect for Thor for this accomplishment because when you really think about the gravity of what he did, it's an insane undertaking, which he estimated would take 3 or 4 years, which dragged out to be almost 10 years. Uh,
Even I would have almost thought it would take longer. But yeah, it's tough. It's like, when you hit those hard points and you're like, wow, I could just fly home for $500 type of thing.
yeah. And I think I missed your original question. I mean, Thor would kind of tell you, I mean, he sort of at the end of this, he had like PTSD. It
Mhm.
was just such an incredible grind and sacrifice. So, um, I mean, it might have been Tuvalu. I can't remember, but it was like he had to wait in Tuvalu for 3 months to
Until
get
the
a
next
boat
ship
back.
came.
Yeah. Yeah. Because again, remember, he's not flying and it's something insane. Like there's only one ferry that goes back and forth between Fiji and Tuvalu. And guess what? It was broken. And when you need a new piece for the engine, you can't go down to Bill's maritime store.
Mhm.
It's got to be like flown or shipped from Germany. So that will take like, a month to get there. So Thor is in this island that is so isolated with no infrastructure. And he is basically walking down to the harbor every day saying, any update? Have we heard any news? And I mean, think of what that could do to you mentally. You want to get home and
Mhm.
kind of start your life. His life has been on hold for 10 years in this weird way. So yeah, I mean, it would have been much easier for him to go, okay, F this, get me that flight to Nadi. I'm going to McDonald's and then going to fly home to Denmark right after. Enough's enough.
Hey guys, quick break from the episode to tell you about BitRefill. BitRefill allows you to shop online and in person without banks, converting your crypto directly into merchant balance. We're talking gift cards to Nike, Amazon, Apple, Airbnb, Hotels.com, and many more, all paid for with crypto. BitRefill offers more than 10,000 gift card options in 180 countries all across Latin America, including Brazil, Colombia, Mexico, Argentina, El Salvador, and many more. You can also apply the code MyLatinLife at checkout to get 10% back on your first purchase. Go to bitrefill.com for more information. What if when you talk to people after they complete the 193, what are some common epiphanies that come up?
Yeah, I think the most common takeaway is there's more to see. There's there's very few people who have quote unquote retired after they did the 193. and said,
Mm,
"Oh, I'm done traveling." I would say everybody's list gets a little bit longer year after
really?
year when they're traveling, and it's like, okay, I'm like, I did this. I'm now going to go back to these 50 countries because I missed A or B or Y or Z. So I would say that is
Wow.
one
I wasn't
thing.
expecting that.
Yeah, yeah.
Because
So
you'd think you would have seen enough temples and stuff by then.
it, it's not the case. There's just too much to see and do. So people are either making new lists or simply just like, for me, for instance, I don't. I'm not pursuing a second or tertiary list when I finish, but
Hmm.
I have a list of, just random things I want to see and do. Like, oh, I went to Cameroon and I learned about this amazing festival that takes place once every 2 years. I'm like, okay.
Hmm.
I'm like, that sounds insane. I want to do that. And that's going to be on my bucket list. Or, oh, I've been to Italy for 10 days. Well, you know what? Maybe my dream is to do a Airbnb villa for a month in Tuscany and just kind of, slow down and see just kind of a third largest type tier of city in Italy versus Rome or Venice. There's just too much to see and do
What do you think the split is between men and women that go after this goal?
it. Another great question. Um, give or take, I think the first known person to go to every country in the world was in the early 90s, a Finnish guy, a journalist. And Nomad Media has this great historical stats on how many people have completed 193 each and every year. If you
Hmm.
go to the 90s, it's like 8 people. So it's one guy in 91, two guys in 93, then two people in 96. And back then, it was all men. And it's basically North American and Western European men, probably 40,
Hmm.
50, 60-year-old guys. Um,
Hmm.
I'm going to say around 2015, things changed in the community. And there's a very, very popular group called Every Passport Stamp on
Hmm.
Facebook. And the
Hmm.
raison d'etre of that group is basically you're trying to go to every country in the world. And a confluence of that group, Instagram, social media, going to every country became a thing.
Hmm.
And when it became a thing, this really widened out what type of people were doing it. So instead of just these North American, Western European men, it became global to every country. It became every age and it became every sex. So more women were doing it, more people with, low index passports were doing it, and
Hmm.
really widened out the community to make it less monolithic. Uh, uh, so starting give or take after 2015.
And do you have any split on like how many people are married and have families
Uh,
versus single?
um, just anecdotally, but yeah, I mean, yeah, I mean, it's obviously more challenging. I mean, again, and I'm going to point to my little event, Extraordinary Travel Festival. One of my speakers is a married woman with 3 kids.
Hmm.
She just took her 6-month-old son to North Korea and Yemen. So I imagine if you went back to your high school reunion and you saw some of your old friends, how many of them have gone holidaying to Yemen with a toddler? I'm going to guess very few people. But in general, she's an outlier even within the community. Um, so a lot of people are single or divorced. Yeah, yeah, but in the same way, there's married couples doing it. There's families doing it, and then there's people who've just worked it out, who are married and like, okay, you're going to come to me with this country, I'm going to do this country by myself, and
Yeah, yeah.
again, everybody figures out how to bake that cake on their own with whatever ingredients work for them.
Because I imagine a lot of the guys, they're like, look, I'm going to be gone for a month doing this thing, going to Eritrea. I'll be back, hopefully.
Yeah, I mean, I interviewed this guy Joel. He just finished 193, and we had a real candid and honest conversation. And he's married. He had a couple kids, and at one point, while he was chasing 193, I mean, he realized he was really kind of putting his family second.
Mm,
And when he kind of came to this realization, he still chased 193, but he kind of adjusted everything. He just did everything about his travel to make it uh, more of a wholesome endeavor for the whole family instead of making this really individualistic pursuit. So,
hmm
yeah, you have to be cognizant of all the different moving parts in your life to be able to accomplish this goal.
And what were his realizations? Was it like, I should be away for max 3 weeks or something like that?
Yep. Just not being away for so long, incorporating his family into more trips. Um, yeah, that's the short of it. So not, I mean, his number one priority, I think, for a couple of years was travel, 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 and then he's like, okay, this isn't working for the family. I got to dial this down and shorten this trip up and include them in some of these trips, and maybe slow down and maybe not finish as soon as I was
Mhm.
anticipating.
So it definitely makes it more expensive to bring the family along because, like, as dudes, we can do like super cheap accommodations. We can eat crappy food. We could, pretty much just like drink mostly beer if like we're in a country with bad water or something like that. Um, but you bring like the family and you're like, oh, now I need like, I don't know, multiple hotel rooms and like this and that. And so it becomes, it's definitely tougher logistically and economically and so forth.
100%, and it starts in general with the airplane flights. So, I
Yeah.
mean, that's obviously one of your bigger drivers, and then instead of buying one airplane ticket, it's two or three or four.
Yeah.
Never mind all the other stuff that you just pointed to. Yeah,
Yeah.
it can get expensive.
Yeah. It's kind of crazy. Um, who should I interview next? Who are some people I should try to get on?
I am going to throw it a name to you,
Okay.
Philippe Azidian. Do you know him from
Hasidian.
Do you know him from Twitter?
Oh, Philippe
So he's a
from
friend of
Paraguay.
mine. Yeah. So
Hmm.
he's a buddy of mine, very super intelligent, super good guy, super interesting. So I think he's an interesting character. Uh, that might be a fun guy. He might be a little podcast shy. I'm
Hmm.
trying to get him on my podcast, Counting Countries, as well, but someone you should have your eye on.
Is he counting countries?
He is. He is. You
Oh,
mean, is he chasing 193?
yeah,
Yes.
yeah, yeah.
Yep.
I
Very,
didn't know that.
very, very well traveled guy and very sharp guy.
I didn't
Hey,
know that.
Philippe.
Yeah, I think he came. I did like a little just meetup in Asuncion, Paraguay, with just like 15, 20 people, and he came out.
Yep. Now that you say that, he mentioned he met you at that event. That's him.
Okay, interesting, interesting. I mean, I want to interview like all your guests. I haven't done it, but I just want to go through like the list of the guests, then like go to their personal websites, go to their contact page, and just like hit up every single one because there's so much you can learn from these people. It's incredible.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I would basically recommend you to talk to everybody I've spoken to because I think they're all fascinating. And I mean, you said, I forget the way you framed it. Like I've interviewed most or all of the world's most traveled people. I mean, I think I'm probably like at 150 interviews all in. So, I mean, there's definitely a lot of people I've spoken to. But in the same way, the community is so wide. I mean, there's just when I started this podcast, I think it was in 2015 or 16.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe at that point, I'm like, oh, this is a finite universe. I'm going to run out of people. That is absolutely not the case. And there are simply so many people in the community that I will never get to them all. So, yes, I definitely have spoken to a ton of the world's most traveled, but
Mm-hmm.
I have not spoken to the majority of them. There's still so
Really?
many more fantastic people to speak to. And, my podcast is monthly.
I know you
It's
need more episodes. But you've been cranking. I mean, and you have good ratings. I looked at, I think it's like the listennotes.com does sort of like it ranks the podcast on a worldwide basis. And yours, according to listennotes.com, actually ranks higher than mine by the metrics they track.
Yeah, I was somewhat surprised and pleased. So yeah, Counting Countries is ranked in the top 2.5% of all podcasts, which was quite nice to see and pretty cool. But yeah, so I guess I'm pretty fortunate that other people are interested in what I'm interested in. So that's a good feeling.
You'd think they'd all be down to do interviews because they've invested so much of their life and money into pursuing this mission. But I imagine a couple people have been shy, or maybe they say, "Oh, let me wait till I get to some next goal and then I'll do the interview." Has it been hard to track people down?
In the beginning, it was more challenging just because my network was limited.
Mm.
Um, now, now that's not an issue. I have a very long queue of people I am interested in speaking to, and then I think what you were pointing to. I mean, I definitely have had some people say no. Um, I'll even. I mean, I have a friend of mine the Matt McCaughey. Matt was one of my early listeners. He was living in Cambodia, and I think when my podcast came out, he reached out to me to say hi, and we've met each other multiple times over the years. And I'm like, Matt, you're gonna be on my podcast. You're gonna be on my podcast. And then he was stuck at 192 for like 5 years. He couldn't get into Syria, and then he finally got into Syria uh, I think in 2024. And I'm like, okay, Matt, it's time. And he's still, dragging and will not commit. So he would be a good example of someone, someone who does the travels. I mean, again, so well traveled, so accomplished, but he's not creating reels on IG and doing a dance in front of, Medina
With
Salah
the
in Saudi
American
Arabia.
flag photo or something.
Yeah, yeah. So it's just not him. So there, yeah. I think he'll eventually come on. But yeah, so there's some of the shy people, and yeah. So not everybody wants to go on.
No, fair enough. Fair enough. And just again, like what's been people's experience about adjusting back to regular everyday life after completing 193? It's such a weird thing to. I get reverse culture shock even when I just go back to the North America after being in Latin America for like 6 months. I can't even imagine after doing these crazy trips and then having to adjust back to normal life.
And I think there's a couple of different ways of answering that. And looking at you, who's more of a digital nomad, and I don't know your specific travel schedule, but maybe the average digital nomad only goes home 2 weeks a year. And maybe that is a bit of culture shock. And there are some perpetual travelers in the 193 community who just go week after week after week after week. But a lot of us in the community are almost like living dual lives. So
Mm.
they might have a quote unquote real job, but
Hmm.
they're also chasing 193 in every free moment that they have.
Mm.
So we have some extreme, I'll call them insane people like Thor Peterson or um, Jorge Sanchez. So
Yeah. And they're on the perpetual traveler side. But there's other people that it's like almost like a slingshot approach or like a base approach where you have a base and then you set off from the base, come back to the base, that kind of thing.
well, I mean, so I'm going to point out, I'm going to point Lucy Shu. Lucy lives in San Fran area. She's married with like a 7-year-old daughter. She's a full-time teacher. But and I mean, I've interviewed her and she's a friend of mine and I talked to her. I'm like, I don't know how she does it because it's like she really does have like two lives. I mean, she'll be making like a princess outfit for her daughter for her birthday party with 20 kids at her house, going to work. But then I see her a week later shaking hands with the Dalai Lama. And she's finished 193. I mean, she's sort of in some ways a superwoman. So that would be an example of like she's done it all. Um, and again, I've interviewed her. I don't know how she does it. And then the other comment you made, I think of like people finishing 193 and then how do they adjust to civilian life, so to speak. The other woman I'm thinking of who was another speaker at my event at the Extraordinary Travel Festival. Her name is Louisa Yu. She's a Filipino American woman down in Miami who finished chasing 193 as a 79-year-old. So she finished
Legend.
January of 2024 in Serbia, 79 years old. Now, if you ever would speculate and go, "Oh, she's going to retire." No. So I'm friends with Luisa, and I'm like, Luisa's now in Mogadishu, Somalia. Luisa, 80 years old, is now on a 3-week desert trip in Chad. Luisa is now in the North Caucasus of Russia. So not only did she not quote unquote retire, I mean, she's like ratcheting up her extreme travels. Think about that. Mogadishu, North Caucasus, a very, very challenging desert trip. She went to a remote festival in Pakistan. So there's a great example. Obviously, she'd been to all those countries before, but there's different corners to explore. And
Yeah. I like
she's
how
done.
people from all corners of life are doing this. This idea of a dual life, living. How do you phrase it? Like living multiple lives or having a second identity. I think it's something.
Dichotomy of some sort.
Yeah, I think it's something that most expats and digital nomads can relate to in one way or another. It almost reminds me of being like almost like being like a cat burglar, like a Parisian fancy aesthetic cat burglar. It's like you live like your normal
Le
life.
Peep.
Yeah. Like Lupin, and so you're living your normal life, whatever. You got the job, and then at night you're like sliding down balconies and like stealing art or whatever. That's
Yeah.
kind of what it feels like to be an expat sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, because and I just touched on this a minute ago. It's like my anecdote. If you go back, okay, you know a lot of digital nomads. I mean, that's your tribe. You
Hmm.
know the people, sovereign citizens, second passports, PRs.
Hmm.
That's your tribe. That's your community. But I always say it's like you go back to your high school reunion, and you were this incredible outlier. How many people from your university reunion or your high school reunion
Our
have a life
nomads,
similar to yours?
maybe one. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So, yeah. So whether you're chasing 193, you're a digital nomad, or you have 5 different permanent residents, we're all under this broad universe of travel.
Uh-huh.
But obviously, this gets segmented over and over, and it's like we're all kind of living sure, this Parisian cat burglar life, which
Mm-hmm.
is quite odd and different and eccentric compared to our peer group.
Yeah, it's a fascinating topic. I know we got to wrap it up. We're going to record an episode for the Counting Countries podcast, right? A little bonus episode,
Correct.
something like that. So
You got it.
I'll encourage everybody to subscribe to the Counting Countries podcast as well. If you're listening to this, you're probably already on your podcast player. So go hit the search bar, look up Counting Countries, and subscribe to that podcast as well. Yeah, let's wrap it up. So this has been another episode of the My Latin Life podcast. Again, our guest today, GlobalGaz, Ric Gazarian. Thanks, Ric, for joining us. And to the audience, please subscribe, and we'll catch you in the next episode.
Thank you.